In a field outside Temple, Texas, Meta once tore down a data center it was still building. Not an old facility being replaced, a new one halfway up. Foundations poured, steel standing, visible from orbit. One set of satellite images shows a site running at full speed. The next, months later, shows bare dirt. An estimated $70 million scraped flat. No permit fight, no funding collapse, no loss of faith in AI. The same company would go on to plan campuses measured in gigawatts. It came down because of what was supposed to go inside it. Hold that image, because you are being sold a much simpler story. As much as half the data center capacity due to open in the United States this year will be delayed or canceled, while 4 companies commit $650 billion in a single year. Either the money isn't real or the buildings aren't. The answer is neither. And it starts with the question almost nobody asks about that number: canceled from what? Because the denominator isn't a list of construction sites. It's a list of announcements, some financed and permitted, some a field and a press release. When the market intelligence firm Sightline Climate examined this year's pipeline, it found about 16 gigawatts scheduled to come online this year and only about 5 already under construction. A gigawatt, for scale, is about a fifth of what London draws on an average day. And under construction covers everything from final fit-out to a slab of concrete in an empty field. A year further out, the gap widens. 21 gigawatts announced for next year, 6 of it building. So much of what is described as collapse is the sound of announcements deflating. A press release is free, a gigawatt is not. What looks like an industry losing its nerve is an industry being measured against reality for the first time. You can watch that deflation up close. In the Texas Panhandle, a company called Fermi America announced the most ambitious project yet proposed: 17 gigawatts on a single campus, later renamed for the sitting American president. Within a year, its chief executive had resigned. Its finance chief followed days later, and most of its market value was gone. It still had no confirmed anchor tenant, no customer committed to leasing the campus at the scale it had promised. Nothing had been canceled exactly. There had simply never been very much there. Which leaves the harder question. The projects that are real, funded, leased, under contract, why are so many of them late? Not for want of chips. The bottleneck is the least glamorous equipment in the industrial world. Connecting a site to a grid takes high-voltage transformers and switchgear, and those order books were congested before any of this began. Roughly 2 years from order to delivery for a large power transformer. Today, some estimates run to 4 or 5 years, and prices have roughly doubled. A small fraction of the cost, and nothing moves until it arrives. One missing transformer can hold a $2 billion site still for a year. The United States imports roughly 4 out of every 5 large power transformers it uses. So a build-out justified by technological independence runs on imported electrical gear, increasingly Chinese. According to Wood Mackenzie data, unit imports of high-power transformers from China rose from fewer than 1,500 in 2022 to more than 8,000 by October 2025, straight through a trade war. The tariffs didn't redirect it. There was nowhere else to go, which produces one of the strangest images in modern industry. A short drive from NVIDIA's headquarters, 2 finished data centers sit dark, fully fitted out, waiting for the local utility. Faced with a queue like that, the industry did something that will shape the next decade. It stopped waiting for the grid. Outside Abilene, Texas, sits Stargate, the flagship of the entire boom. It is building its own power plant. 62 diesel generators, 10 gas turbines already on site, and plans for 41 more. Fully built, its private generation would exceed 1.5 gigawatts, among the largest fossil fuel power stations in Texas of any kind. This is not a data center with a power supply. It is a power station with a data center attached, and it is no longer unusual. In Texas alone, more than 80 gigawatts of gas-fired generation is in development, close to half of it designed to feed data centers directly, never touching the public grid. That takes strain off the public network. It also puts power plants where nobody voted on them. Stargate's first approvals came through a low-level Texas authorization called a permit by rule, the same class used for auto body shops and dry cleaners, requiring no public notice and no hearing. Bigger permits came later, which is how people discover what is arriving next door only once it has arrived. Omaira Garcia and her husband, both veterans, spent a year finding their land outside Abilene. They chose it for the horizon. They now change their air filters every 2 weeks, and they learned what was going up beside them only after construction started, because everyone who knew had signed a non-disclosure agreement. In her words, they were never given time to leave. That is how an infrastructure story becomes an electoral one. Maine's legislature passed what would have been the country's first statewide moratorium on large data centers. The governor vetoed it, and the legislature failed to override her. Gallup now finds 7 in 10 Americans oppose one being built near them, more than object to a nuclear plant. And Heatmap Pro counted 2 projects canceled after local opposition in 2023, 6 in 2024, and 25 last year. But the thing that should unsettle the builders more than the protests is quieter than that. Nobody can actually count any of this. There is no comprehensive public register of data centers. No single agency holds the list. When Business Insider set out to map them, it had to work backwards from the one permit almost every site needs, the air quality permit for its backup diesel generators. Much came back redacted as trade secrets. One Ohio site was permitted by a company nobody had heard of. Filings showed it was Google. Another won a 15-year tax abatement worth tens of millions before anyone outside the deal knew it was Meta. It cuts both ways. Semi-analysis, which tracks thousands of sites by satellite, argues the headline trackers undercount what is actually being built, and that the projects they do count skew towards the speculative megaprojects most likely to slip anyway. That opacity is usually a democratic problem. It is also a measurement problem. If you cannot count what is being built, you cannot count what is stopped. The fog that conceals the boom conceals the retreat. And this is where the pessimistic reading runs into trouble, because the best documented pullback of the past 2 years does not actually show an industry in retreat. According to TD Cowen analysts, Microsoft walked away from roughly 2 gigawatts of planned capacity across the United States and Europe, leases, letters of intent, land options. They called it oversupply against demand forecasts, and it was. But watch where those leases went. Google picked up a number of the European ones. Meta raised its spending forecast. Google reaffirmed its own. And Microsoft's own chief executive had already said publicly that there would be an overbuild, and that his company expected to be renting capacity from other people within a couple of years. That is not a collapse. It is a reallocation. One company overshot, another absorbed it, and total committed spending kept climbing. The honest caveat is that the list of buyers is very short, and its 2 biggest names, OpenAI and Anthropic, have yet to show a profit. The same ambiguity runs through the technology. When DeepSeek trained a competitive model for a fraction of what the leaders were spending, it was read as proof that far less hardware would be needed. The industry's answer is the opposite. Make intelligence 10 times cheaper, and people will use it far more than 10 times as much. More efficient engines did not reduce Britain's coal consumption. They multiplied it. Nobody knows which future is being poured in concrete, and both need the concrete now. There is also a second clock running underneath all of this, and it is the one that explains the field in Temple. In a handful of hardware generations, the power drawn by a single AI processor has climbed from a couple of hundred watts to more than 1,000. A rack that once drew 5 or 10 kilowatts now draws well over 100. That is not an equipment upgrade. It changes the building, the floor, the power distribution, the cooling. Air can no longer move heat at that density, so the densest racks have to be liquid-cooled, and a building designed for air is very hard to convert. A design can go out of date between the groundbreaking and the opening, which brings us back to that field in Texas. There are 2 buildings on it today, drawing close to 3 times the power of the one that was destroyed into the same patch of ground. Meta didn't demolish a data center because the future had been canceled. It demolished one because the future was arriving faster than its own construction schedule. That is the story hiding inside the cancellation figures. One clock runs in silicon and turns over every year. The other runs through steel, transformers, permits, and public consent, and takes half a decade. 2 clocks running at wildly different speeds in the same field. Most of what gets reported as cancellation is the sound of them colliding. And the troubling part is not that half the projects are late. It is that after more than $1 trillion in commitments, nobody can reliably tell you which half.